Hello, you're about to watch a live stream with myself and Trina Moore, user researcher and UX designer, as we talk about accessibility, usability, and UX design. We touch on questions like the difference between accessibility and usability, as well as the importance of inclusive design. The live stream was hosted on Superpeer, where you can go and subscribe to be notified when I release a new live stream, as well as the mentoring design services that I offer. I hope you enjoy watching back the live stream. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Careers in Tech live stream. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight we have Trina with us, user experience researcher and designer, and we are going to be covering the topics of accessibility, usability, and UX design. I hope you're as excited as I am. Let's bring it over to you, Trina, and could you tell us please where you're based and what you do?
I am in the US. I'm in Virginia, so just outside of Washington, D.C. And I do UX research and design. I used to do development. So my title is UX engineer. Yeah, I guess, and I do research and design.
We'll get into that and deep dive into that a bit further, but could you tell us, what did your journey into UX look like? Because I came across an Instagram post of yours a few weeks back, and just the way that you got into UX really caught my attention and it stuck in my mind. I think that's how I started messaging you, bringing back to that Instagram post just to talk about your journey and then getting in to talk together now.
Yeah, it was a windy road. I started out, or actually right before I got into UX, I was in banking. And so I'm about to date myself a little bit, but the internet was just really starting to boom around this time. AOL. And so I started seeing people that I actually was connecting with on AOL, so on the internet. They were creating web pages, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I want to be able to make one of those." And I remember one particular person, they said they created it it's a tool, a WYSIWYG, just click and drag tool for making their application. So I made one, and I didn't like the details about how things laid out. And I noticed that I could switch from a visual. So can you do that in WordPress? But where I could switch from a visual, or Dreamweaver, or several others, you can switch from visual to the code in HTML. And at that time, I didn't even know what HTML was, but I saw, oh, B, that's bold, and I is italics, and P is for paragraph. It's like, I can learn this. So I basically just taught myself HTML, and it was a little bit before I jumped into CSS. So I went from banking into being a web designer. A friend of mine was like, oh, our company, she was a conference planner, and she worked for a contracting firm that planned conferences for state and federal government. She's like, they're looking for a web designer. They have a contract. They need to build websites. Isn't that what you do? And again, it was really a new thing. And I was like, yeah, I got that job. And that I want to say the rest is history, but just it graduated from there, from doing the design and developing it, to our customers were asking, since they were federal government, like Health and Human Services and tourism, a law came about where those public websites had to be accessible. So that's how I moved into learning about accessibility. And while, oh gosh, I'm trying to think, was Google all that popular? I may have just Yahoo searched it at that point in time, trying to understand how to meet standards for accessibility, and I stumbled on usability. And so at the same time that I was learning how to develop for accessibility, I then learned about usability, and yeah, from there, that's my yeah.
I love it. It's really good. I love how your journey is really self-taught. Like you went into the back end of code, you inspected it, you started to understand how different snippets of the code then translated into what you saw visually. So kind of touching on your title, so in your bio, you refer to yourself as a researcher / designer, but in other circumstances, you also use the title UX engineering, and I'm assuming you'd drawn that from like your past experience with code. But what would you say UX engineering means to you?
So a lot of times, and I just was in a conversation with someone about this recently, you'll see UX, UI, and I'm always questioning, why do they have to call out UI with UX if UX encompasses the user interface? Like it's implied, right? But being able to build that UI, the word build and engineer, so that's, and also the years of experience, a master's degree, engineer just fits between being able to do the research, the design, and do the development. I can have conversations with the developers about server side versus client side events or actions. I can have that in-depth conversation with them about the technical constraints, feasibility, things like that. So I will take either one, whether it's engineer or research or designer or research designer, either one or any of the three.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm hoping that like developers must love you because you do have that background knowledge in coding and development and programming languages. So hopefully that then translates into your designs as well. Which is good.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I will switch to inspect. When we pull something up in the browser, I can switch to inspect and look and see the CSS. And sometimes I have to help them figure out how to implement particular design features. So yeah, I have a lot of conversations with our developers.
That's really good. And I think conversations are just so helpful, especially early on, about the usability and accessibility of what you're designing. I'm going to deep dive a little bit into your bio. So in your bio, you talked about leading training sessions on the topics of accessibility, usability, UX design to help software developers and UX beginners understand the value and process of inclusive user experience design. Very strong bio, by the way. How has your understanding of accessibility best practices helped you in your career?
Whew. It's kind of a mix. Sometimes I feel like it adds more tension, only because I'm asking for even more for the developers to implement. But knowing that I'm able to help them make that application, I'm getting ready to say accessible, but reach, support a broader scope of people. I think even when we've had clients, or I say we because I work for a small contracting firm, and so as a team, sometimes we go to a project as a team, but sometimes the client doesn't even know or understand accessibility or usability. They just know, oh, we just want you to make it pretty or make it pop or whatever. But being able to bring that also to their projects and let them know we can reach a broader audience if we make sure that everything's keyboard accessible, everything is able to is compatible with assistive technology. It deepens your skill set, and what you are bringing to the table.
100%. And just as a side note to those who have joined the live stream, if you've got any questions as we go through our different topics, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we go along to hopefully answer towards the end of the live stream. So just coming back to focus on accessibility and advocating for that in your teams. I know when you initially started giving your answer, you said that sometimes you might make it a bit difficult for the developers. Is that because, in fact, why is that? Why would you say you make it a bit difficult for them?
I think that a lot of times developers, they have their degree in computer science, they've gone through school, and there was no mention of accessibility, of usability. You know, they get their job like, oh, we can help build their application or website. It's almost like they feel like a superhero. I can do all this. And then if they get into a project and then there's a UX person who's saying, oh, wait, there's more. I think sometimes it's a shock to them. They may feel, or I feel from some of the interactions sometimes that it steals some of their thunder, that there's another person that they should be collaborating with. It's not always that way. I've worked with some fantastic developers, particularly more recently, where when so we're an agile team, the project I'm on now, and actually I'm getting ready to say the opposite. So that answers that question about the challenge. I was now starting to talk about the good stuff. But yes, of course, there are developers who come in and they're like, hey, what do we need to do to make this easy for users? But I think some are just taken aback that there's another person that is going to contribute more than making it pretty. You know, so if their expectation is just, I'm gonna give them hex, give them colors and fonts, and then all of a sudden I'm asking for more, I think sometimes that just trips them up sometimes.
It can be difficult conversations, which you just do have to have. And I think the same can be said for designers. So through my university course, I wouldn't say that that's where I learned a lot about accessibility, apart from color contrast. That was the big one. You'd always get color contrast as a designer to pick up on. And then I joined a company where they worked in local government, and like you say, and what you've experienced, there are laws and legislations in place that you have to adhere to, because the services you're working on are used by thousands, if not millions of people. So they do need to be accessible for everyone to use.
Yeah.
So 100% agree. While we've been talking, I realized we've touched on two different terms of like accessibility and usability. In your own words, what would you say is the difference between accessibility and usability?
I'm about to repeat the prefix in the word, but accessibility would be making sure that all content and all features can be accessed. And then usability is more of a quality measure of how efficient, how easy it is to find what you're looking for and complete tasks. And really, accessibility would be first, right? You have to be able to access the content in order to use it. Right? So, and apps or websites, they can have high usability and not be accessible. And then you can also address accessibility and it still be very cumbersome. So for in real quick example, let's say all the content is keyboard accessible, but then there's no skip nav link, particularly on, let's say, a news website where there could be, the navigation could be significant, like 15 clicks just to get to that main feature, body area, the body of the app or the website. And so even though all the content is accessible, if it's cumbersome where they have to click 15 times to get to that main article, while someone else who is not using just keyboard only or is visual, you can see that immediately. You just draw your eyes down to that area. So that's how something can be accessible and not be usable. And I think I'm going to assume it's commonly known that usability is like probably one of the most, you hear about that even more, and people focus on that a lot more and leave off the accessibility.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I think it's really important that, like, as designers, researchers, engineers, we have these conversations so everyone can be aware of this knowledge and pick it up and self-learn and educate as they go along, because it's so important. So when I learned about accessibility, it just made sense to me that if you make these simple changes to your processes, your designs, like the way of your thinking when you approach a project, it can benefit thousands of people.
Right. And you think it's particularly with a title that has users in it.
Yeah.
You should care about all the users, right?
Mhm.
Some of them.
100%.
Yeah.
How would you say that you advocate for accessibility in your role?
So the project that I'm on now, thankfully, they do have, they're enforcing it. Like all of the apps. So I think I hadn't said, so I'm working, it's a large organization, and they have an application where you have to input so they have an application where you have to input other applications. So when I say enterprise, I work on a lot of intranet apps. So we may build a website or an application, for the accounting department, and build the training application, and build the job vacancy application. So all of those applications, we have to log them into a system, and we have a huge spreadsheet where we have to go through and do an accessibility test, which includes JAWS, a lot of manual tests, changing the settings on the system so that you can magnify using the operating system's accessibility tools. Right now, it's more so just making sure that we factor in time to get those things done, and trying to address it throughout the whole process, not just at the end. It starts, like you said, with contrast. It starts with the initial design, making sure you have enough contrast, and drawing up just all the things that are applicable to the way something is designed, making sure you provide the developers the alt text for the images or the text for the captions and such. And then when they're building, thankfully, the project I'm on now, before it gets to the functional testers, it comes to the UX team. So we do a review. Yes. So we get to do a review and make sure everything's keyboard accessible, that the focus is, it's obvious where the focus is for the, as one is navigating. So there's a lot less friction and challenges on the project I'm on now. But just making sure along the way that I'm reminding the developers or any other, and backing up any of the other UX people, making sure that we do what we need to do from beginning to end.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, especially at the beginning, to have these processes in place to make sure that accessibility has a seat at the table when you're talking about building your products and services. And moving on to your second passion, which overlaps with accessibility, what is inclusive design and why is it important?
A lot of times I see people use accessibility and inclusive design just interchangeably. And so accessibility would be a part of the inclusion. There are other aspects of a design that factor into being inclusive, because there's more to our experience than just accessing it. You know, our experience with a product starts when we consider using that tool. Let's say you're considering, I don't know, buying new glasses, right? We both have glasses on. And so as soon as you get to that website, that experience is starting, even though you haven't bought anything, and seeing if all the images that you see of people with glasses, if none of them reflect you, you start to wonder, oh, well, were they not thinking about me? Or you're buying clothes and all of the models are slim and there's not a variety of the range of body sizes and things. So inclusive design would include accessibility and usability, representation, which I refer to as equity, and ethics. So caring about that person's privacy and being transparent, making sure that they feel safe using that product. All four of those, which I can repeat: accessibility, usability, equity, and ethics, they all factor into a well-rounded, inclusive experience.
That is really good. And it builds up such a solid picture of inclusive design and experiences as a whole. Kind of bringing it back closer to your job role, how do you ensure that research and the design work that you do is inclusive?
Since the apps that I'm working on are all employees, I actually have it a little, maybe I'll say a lot easier, because it's easy to access people who are already, in the building or are part of the organization that you're in. So it's easier than, let's say, an e-commerce site where you may need to reach out to a recruiting firm and give them specifications of, okay, we want people between this age and this age, and you're laying out criteria. But there are times where I do have to specifically say, so a lot of times when I go to the product owner, a role in agile development, the person who kind of has the final say for the application, a lot of times they will immediately suggest the power user. So that's one, it's a slightly different aspect, but still I usually have to say, wait, I don't just want the people who are the power user. We also need those people who don't use it that much. And in fact, you find out a lot about what is not, where the usability is poor, because they're only accessing that app intermittently. They're not in it all day, every day. So really, I just have to have conversations with whoever that lead, in our case, it's a product owner, to make sure that I am getting a broad spectrum of our employee population. But I do my own recruiting in that respect. So I kind of have a little power in that way.
Good, and it's great that you can have that say in creating an accessible recruitment pool or candidates that you work with, and bring that, because I think having that inclusivity in the research will take all those different experiences into the design, and those people be accounted for and considered. Mm-hmm. It's good. It's really good. Speaking of good, I'm trying to tie everything together here, you see.
You're doing a great job.
No, thank you. Are there any companies that you admire that do a great job of designing inclusively?
Designing. So I did an article on my blog where I actually had to do some research, because I was like, okay, if I'm gonna write an article and I'm just gonna go by companies that I engage with, I also need to look broader than just the products that they put out. Like, are they inclusive in their hiring? Are they inclusive in their marketing? But I have to say, Rihanna's companies is Savage Fenty and Fenty Beauty. From what I don't know about their hiring, but as far as the products that they put out are very inclusive. The marketing, advertising, fashion shows that she does for her products, there's a broad range of people. Like, how often do you see a fashion show and there's someone who's an amputee? And so yes, I commend Rihanna, Fenty products. I have definitely started to see more with clothing. I can't even think of there's several companies where I am definitely seeing more diverse representation of people, different skin tones, different body sizes, which I think is great. Ben and Jerry's is very vocal about having values that are very inclusive and supporting a variety of initiatives and efforts to provide some equity across different groups or marginalized groups. Yeah.
So good to see.
Yeah, that's a couple. Yeah.
No, they're great examples that you gave. We've just had a question come through on the chat, and it's from Angie. They've asked, what trends in inclusive design in the inclusive design process have you seen that you don't agree with, and why? Do you want me to read that again?
What trends in inclusive design have I seen that I don't agree with?
So in the inclusive design process.
Oh, in the inclusive design process. I don't know exactly.
Or did you have more of a line around inclusive design? Because you seemed like you had a train of thought there.
So, I mean, the first thing that came to mind, but I'm not sure if this meets the question, is companies that want to present themselves as inclusive. And I know you see this on social media a lot of, we're going to change our logo to a rainbow this month, or we're going to do these things this particular day or this particular month, and try to convey that they're inclusive. But then if you go and look at their DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion numbers, they have hardly any diversity. It's a very homogenous in workspace. I don't know. Is that the question, or answer that question?
Yes. I think that she picked up that sounded like tokenism was a trend that is not, that you're not on board with. No. No.
Yeah, no. And immediately I think of that, no. I think of the movie Get Out, where the lady was like, no.
Oh,
no. Anyway, so you'd have to watch it.
I think I remember seeing that scene, just being like, oh no.
Yes.
What advice would you give to someone? So this is the last question from me, but if anyone in the chat or on the live stream has more questions, keep them coming through. So last question for myself is, what advice would you give someone that wanted to increase their knowledge of designing for an inclusive experience? So that's accessibility, usability, the whole package. Like, where would they begin? If you could
I always say now I'm getting ready to mix up a whole bunch of things. I feel like UX as a career requires, so it's going to be my opinion, because you're not always going to see job descriptions that say, oh, we want you to do inclusive design. But I would say that they should. So making it a priority to just at a fundamental level, understanding people. That's a start. So any training that you can get on design psychology and just understanding how people think, process, make decisions, that would be a baseline. And really, that is also the baseline for any design courses you take, whether you're looking at Hick's Law, Fitts Law, Gestalt's principles, 2080 rule, all of those are really based on psychology. So all of UX really is based on psychology. And same with inclusion. It's really psychology. It's how people engage with the world, with a product. People want to feel understood, respected, and valued. So if you're building a product, you want to invoke those emotions. And you're only going to be able to do that if you understand people, which I'm about to repeat myself, and that's going to be making sure that you make that content accessible, that you make sure that it's easy, right? You make sure that that they feel represented, they feel spoken to and heard and considered during the process of the design. So I would say start with just that basic fundamental of finding any courses or anything online. I've done self-taught. You don't necessarily have to take a course or a boot camp, but yeah, Google is amazing, right? So learning about psychology and then continuing on to understand and research and learn about accessibility. WCAG, WCAG I think it's .org, has more information that you could probably digest. So their webaim.org kind of brings it down a bit, but provides a lot of guidance about accessibility. Nielsen Norman Group, they're really, I guess, pivotal in usability. For equity, and recently I was looking for principles because we want to be able to find guidelines, right? Heuristics, principles. You want to have something you can go to and I want to make sure that I do this and that and that. You have that with accessibility. You have that with usability. It's still kind of gray and being worked out with equity and representation. But I found a site recently, I don't remember the name of it, but researching equitable design and ethical design. Which is really, if you think of dark patterns, that would be the common phrase. That's the opposite of ethical design. So knowing what you should not do, researching how to what are dark patterns and how to avoid them. So that would hit on that fourth one. But I definitely think, I'm hoping that over time, more comes out for equity and making sure that or how to design equitable experiences.
And just one resource to shout out that Uji has popped in the chat, that is aliresources.webflow.io. I think I've come across that one before, and it's a really good catalog of loads of different resources around accessibility. So thank you for sharing that in the chat.
Oh, other resources for inclusiveness in general would be Microsoft. Adobe also has a blog and a lot of articles about just inclusive design in general. I forgot about those too. Those are others as well.
These are really good. I am going to type those up after our live stream and I'll share them on Twitter and tag you. But if there are no further questions in the chat, I want to thank you all for coming along to today's live stream. I hope that you have learned a lot or something new on accessibility, usability, and UX design. And I look forward to hosting more of these in future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.